What's going on, boys? Thanks to our patrons and Fiverr customers, arm yourselves, life stuff. The last few days I've been working on fixing a huge mess, but there's no real fixing it. Even if we, on our end, accomplish what we need to accomplish, there's already tons of damage done. And this is the multi-day scenario in which I've been thinking about fatherhood again. So while I'm trying to do damage control and figure out all the damage this other person has done and put together a brief, which in a brief like this I've never needed to put together before, and I've spent 3 days untangling this knot of problems. Someone's son was running around, and he must have been somewhere between 7 and 9. And when it comes to other people's kids, especially when they're acting a fool, I don't say anything, I don't step in, that's not my responsibility, that's not my place. Unless it's really important. Anyway, he knocked something over and almost broke it, and it wasn't anything important, so I wasn't gonna say anything, but he smiled at me, like, or trying to be cute, like being cute excuses acting a fool, and then he went right back to it. And I didn't say anything, I didn't do anything, but in my head, I'm thinking, if that were my son, I would hit him to make him act right. And that's terrible, but at the same time, that feels like the right thing to do. So I needed to think about this, or why is that urge, or would my urge to hit my son be the correct option? And the answer I came to was, there are lessons a boy needs to learn early. If a grown man were screwing around and broke something, and then he tried to be cute to get out of it, what would polite society think and do? He'd get stomped or he'd get arrested, and neither are good. And when you think about disciplining a child, especially a boy, the way you exercise authority creates expectations for how authority will be wielded by others in the future. And a cop or a criminal or a bully or a tyrant is not going to give your son, your grown adult son, a stern talking to. Not going to put him in timeout. At best, at the very best, they're going to fuck him up irreparably in some way. At worst, they're going to kill him, or they're going to lock him up forever. If you treat your child gently, you create gentle expectations. And the world is not gentle. Especially people with power, they are not gentle. And all it takes is one bad encounter with power at any age to be done for the rest of your life. If your life lasts that long. Your son needs to learn what force is and how to deal with it without charging into something and facing consequences he is utterly unprepared for, without coming to understand force in a way that turns him into a tyrant himself, and without cowering his entire life until he explodes, which is what I did. And that's when a larger idea about fatherhood came in, particularly in fathering a son. A father is supposed to, for his son, represent the ugliness of life, and inflict that ugliness on him in measured and safe ways, so that he can come to terms with reality, or what reality is, early, and a mistake is not the end. I think that's why it's so common for fathers and sons to clash. However, with that sort of fathering, I think there comes an expectation that eventually, at some point, either the son will get it absorb the lessons, or the father will be defeated. This representation of life's ugliness, the safe version of life's ugliness. So that from that point on, the son has the strength to fight ugliness and the confidence to do it. And after that point's been reached, the father and son can be friends. Or comrades, even. The son has survived or completed the initiation into manhood. Then the father and the son can be brothers in burden. And I think that's also where this fathers and sons becoming friends later in life comes from. Now, issues arise when fathers inflict more than safe, measured cruelty on their sons too early and too often. There are also fathers who won't be defeated or can't be defeated and won't acknowledge their sons' rise into manhood. Whether the father didn't get them to that point by ill-equipping them or beating them down too much and making them cower, or the son reaches that manhood point independently and the father feels the need to continue stomping his son. And while I think that that sort of escalation can produce a harsher, more effective son, the tension that builds over the course of however many years does not resolve naturally or safely, positively, productively. It explodes. And then you have an unstable father and an unstable son, both fixated on violence, on dominance, on lesson teaching, all this nasty stuff. There's no resolution and there's no confident level and mutual love achieved. So, for example, my father did defeat his father, who was an evil man, but they never resolved. And while my paternal grandfather slipped into dementia, it haunted and still haunts my father to this day. This now forever unresolved guilt and anger. And I see the same pattern playing out between me and my father, except I'm never going to beat my father in any productive way. And even if I did, let's say I did beat my father in some way, somehow, it would turn out exactly the same way his relationship with his father did. Nothing but guilt and anger until the end. And another thing that hit me in all this is my job is to develop the willpower to be beaten. I'm not going to turn out, if I'm a father, like my father, because I can't beat my father. More likely, I'm going to turn out like my grandfather if I'm not careful, and if I have a son, one day he's going to defeat me, and I'm not going to have the will or the grace to swallow my pride and embrace my son and as a man. And one of the things about this that's bothering me is I know I'm going to be, if I become a father, an awful, cruel father. My son is going to hate me, and I'm going to give him every justifiable reason to. And he's going to be strong. My son is going to be very strong. And he's going to despise me for very good reason. My challenge is going to be in some compartmentalized place, staying detached. And when it comes time for me to get my ass beat, or for my son to rise above me, to accept it. Or, if I do somehow end up turning out like my father instead of my grandfather, to let myself be defeated. Or at least acknowledge my son as a man at some point, after overcoming some trial. And then, after this, which is not going to be fun for anybody, to try to make that resolution as easy and as natural and as loving as possible, if that's what my son wants. Because I think the important thing about not just fathering but parenting is accepting if you bring a child into the world, what you want doesn't matter. What matters is what your child needs. So if I want a resolution after being an awful father for however many years, and my son justifiably, reasonably, rationally doesn't want it or needs something else, then that is a hard pill I'll need to figure out how to swallow. I need to give him the strength to fight the world and the confidence, the self-belief to do that, and then to accept whatever decision he comes to after that. Because I think if you're a man raising a male, if you don't forge your son out of iron, it's not going to be pretty, especially with how ugly the world is. And it's so painful what you have to be and what you have to do. You have to become a monster that is designed to be defeated so your son can take on more monsters and worse monsters. And to do that, knowing you will be hated for every good reason. And it's surreal looking at my life almost from the outside right now, or at least my childhood, was someone else's failed experiment. I could ascend to a messianic level tomorrow, and it still wouldn't change the fact that my childhood is done and it was a failed experiment. And all I can do, if I'm not gonna die, is, and I'm gonna be a father, is prepare for fatherhood and try to get the experiment right next time. Give the right lessons in the right amount, be beaten at the right time, and then support my son in whatever decision he makes after that. Your desires no longer matter. Your son's well-being and capability are what matters. And that is such a gruesome thing. And I think that's why for the longest time, two things. One, I haven't wanted a son. For years, if I was going to be a father and I had only one child, I would want a daughter. Because then the gruesome parts of her ascending is her mother's problem, or are her mother's problems. And by that same token, every woman I've dated who's ever even imagined having children has not wanted a daughter. They've all wanted sons. And I think even if they haven't thought about it, although I would bet some of them have, they recognize that raising a daughter as a mother would suck, so they want a son, so it's my problem. We're both assholes. And this is a quick freak-out video because I'm still in executive mode. I'm coming down right now. But just how dreadful fatherhood is for fathers and for sons. For everybody. Because the world is too cruel to permit permissiveness, or to allow a male to be gentle by default without destroying him. And we'll leave it there and to spend the next few hours radiating off the doom drum evil. Executive mode, executive mindset. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you haven't.